opinions expressed are those of the advertiser and do not necessarily represent those of WOAI and iHeartMedia.
Welcome. This is Sidebar. Sidebar, a frank discussion on the law, life, and liberty. Sponsored by the LaHood Norton Law Group. And now, your objection sustained. Your hosts, Karen Klaus and former Bexar County District Attorney, Nico LaHood.
1200 WOAI, this is Sidebar. The let's see, 2 days after Thanksgiving, but since I continued eating Thursday and Friday, I feel like every day is Thanksgiving. How was y'all's Thanksgiving?
It was great. Thank God. It was
Fantastic.
It was wonderful. And all my healthy eating suspended for
Yes.
a day.
Thank you for
My
at
body
least saying that.
I look forward to that meal twice a year for Thanksgiving and Christmas. It's smoked turkey. My mom whips up the potatoes. There's green bean casserole. There's just stuffing, stovetop stuffing or whatever. There's a dessert. I mean, it's just, and I mix it all together and the synergy of the flavors. Ugh, I love it. I ate 3 huge plates.
Like a cooking show over here.
Oh, man.
No, but after a while,
I'm hungry now.
it is sickening, isn't it? It's like,
Well, I'm on my body. For me, I'm
Yes.
not used to it. So, I mean, yeah, my body rejects it, but it's worth it. I mean, I committed the sin of gluttony, I'm sure.
I think everybody
With great
did.
pride, yeah.
Well, I mean, hopefully everybody had a great Thanksgiving, even though Joy Reid says that it is a bad holiday that's linked to slavery. And I've heard a lot of people in the media recently talking about how it is something that's terrible and it's a made up a fairy tale and it's just no good because it's linked to slavery.
Well, what the narrative is, it's not that it's made up. It's not a myth. It's that it should be a day of mourning and regret because there was so much genocide. There's nothing to be thankful for. And look, the way you make a lie good is you take a little bit of truth and then you expound on it. And then because there's that little bit of truth in there, you can get passionate about it. There's some confirmation of what you're saying, but it's complete BS. The 1619 Project has a lot of that when you're talking about Jamestown and the first slaves that came to the United States. And we can talk about that, but there's a distinction between what happened at Jamestown and the horrific acts of Jamestown, a lot of the people there, and Plymouth, where the Pilgrims came. And who the Pilgrims were, their journey over here, which was fascinating to me. The 2 ships that they initially, George and I were joking back and forth about it, the Speedwell and the Mayflower. Speedwell never left because it had too many problems. So they all packed into the Mayflower. And who the Pilgrims were and what they were trying to leave from England to Holland. I mean, there's just so much rich history there that is the foundation. And George and I talked about this on Raw Rated Christianity. We did a special show last night because of Thanksgiving Thursday.
Oh my gosh.
And we dissected all that.
it.
So that's okay. But you can go back and watch it.
I will.
But we didn't even get as detailed as we wanted to. I mean, it's true, rich history that our children are not being taught. And then so when you take something that Joy Reid is spewing, and this is just a miserable woman. I would love to sit down with her. She wouldn't if she had an open mind, which she doesn't. But it's just a lie. It's not a distortion. It's not taking a little bit of truth and then distorting it for an agenda. It's an outright lie. So for me, in my world, the Pilgrims and the first Thanksgiving have been falsely indicted, but here's the key, falsely convicted, and that conviction is following this country all the way through today, and our children are being taught this, and they're being taught to hate that and not to be thankful, because the reality is, who are the Pilgrims thankful to? To God, because when you talk about an attitude of gratitude, and I'll pass it on to George here in a second, we love all these life coaches love to say, I wake up grateful, and I practice gratitude. Well, how do you practice gratitude? Well, you make a list of things you're grateful for. Okay, great. Well then, but you can't be grateful for something unless you're grateful to someone. I mean, so who are you directing your gratitude towards? And of course, they don't want to mention God or a transcendent creator of everything. And so it really comes down to that for me, when they want to take God out of his position so government can replace themselves with God. They can redefine what's right and wrong and what's moral and evil. And then you don't have to live life that way, and then want to change the way the foundation of this country, which is Judeo-Christian in nature and ideology. It doesn't mean you have to be following Christ follower, but I'm just saying those are the ideas that formulated this country. And the Mayflower Compact, we'll talk about that at some point, I'm sure, is part of that journey, because it truly was the purest and the first pure form of a United States document that wasn't a charter from England. You know, back then there was Virginia and Massachusetts. But so I said a lot there, Karen. I'm sorry. There's so much to unpack.
No, and that's what I want to stop you now, because what I'm thinking is I want to delve into this, but I also want to talk about other things that we're going to be talking about today. And one of the things I wanted to mention is, was it last Thanksgiving or was it the Thanksgiving before? All of them seem to just go together. But they're starting to talk about masks again. And I can't remember now if it was 2 Thanksgivings ago when they were telling you couldn't have Thanksgiving with your family and that everybody should wear a mask indoors or keep your windows open, even though it was, 20 degrees in some places of America. Why is it that we are hearing about masks again? Is this part of some big ugly
gift that
scheme?
keeps on giving. That's why it works very well. It's a great way to sort of make government control of the masses acceptable. I mean, remember, it's always done in the name of safety, in the name of concern for the population. It's always the opposite, Nico, of what it's purported to be. This is what I don't like. There's always a slogan behind it. Well, we're very concerned about people. Health and Human Services is doing this for the safety of individuals, and so they're contemplating requesting mask mandates because of so-called long COVID, which appears to be a syndrome of, like I said, anything from brain fog to a really bad runny nose to coughing to all kinds of cold symptoms. It's this sort of catch-all post-COVID syndrome called long COVID. Now, I'm one of those guys who doesn't. I believe it's mythology. I don't believe there's any basis for that. There's a ton of research on so-called long COVID. I think it's indefinite at best. But make no mistake, Karen, it's going to be used, and it's going to be leveraged to the hilt to justify restriction of movement and control of the population, which I hate. And so, yeah, that's where
I'm
we're.
already starting to see videos of China of them like meeting people that aren't getting vaccines or not wearing masks. I don't even remember.
Well, have you seen the videos of China? The protests are going backwards. I mean,
yes.
they're actually resisting. It's like they've had enough. I mean, enough is enough. I mean, this is part of the whole censorship we railed against. I know you're just going over the topics for today.
Absolutely.
I'm sure we're going to dissect Thanksgiving more and all that. And of course, this long COVID, it seems to be another scam. I mean, again, I'm going to say seems to be. I mean, George has really delved into the studies. But when you think about it, it's a control thing. And China's pushing back. The censorship, I think this would have been dealt with a long time ago if there wasn't so much censorship and people were free to exchange ideas and to challenge authority to say, wait a minute, I'm self-educated. Here's someone else that's saying something antithetical to what you're saying, and give them credit. But when they're censored and you're only hearing one narrative, people start believing that. You combine that with a wonderful thing called fear that is used. Then you combine ignorance and fear. Ignorance just meaning not knowing. I mean, I'm ignorant to a lot of things. I'm just saying ignorance meaning because you've controlled the narrative through censorship. Fear because you're seeing something happen, and then you have control.
But it is something that started in China. Oh my gosh, I don't want to say it, but we saw it start in China where they were spraying down people on the streets, and people always seem to wear masks there. It moved here, but with all of the censorship that was going on in America, do you think it's possible for them to even start the masks up again and people actually wear them?
Try to. Possible, yes. Probable, no. I think people are tired of it. I mean, you're always going to find... Look, we die... How many weeks in a row did we talk about masks and personal protection equipment and viral molecule size versus bacteria molecule size and nanometers and the size of a viral molecule, and why when you're dealing with anthrax and real viruses, what do they walk around in body condoms? They're not wearing a mask. I mean, they are totally... And George talked about when he was working for Merck and some of these in the actual laboratory and how they covered themselves and what they used and how it was truly fitted. I mean, we dissected all that years ago, actually, now. But sure, is it possible? I think they're going to want to, but you have to. I think the deeper question that George likes to get into is why. What are they trying to accomplish? They've already whoever they are, right? But they've already tested the control factor. We're really good, and we've been really susceptible about handing over control and rights. Now, remember, there's a difference between privileges and rights. You don't have a right to drive. It's a privilege. That's why it's much easier to suspend your driver's license than it is to take away your liberties or to convict you as a felon or something like that. You have a different rights versus privileges. And we showed that most people, and I think I'm praying people are waking up, we're very willing to hand over rights for safety. And we talked about that distinction.
And it's sad because sometimes it's used as for safety reasons, but it's not really for safety reasons because especially with COVID, no one kind of knew what we were. I mean, remember all the stickers on the floor that said 6 feet apart and one
Why
mask,
6
two
feet?
masks.
Why not 5? What about 7?
Exactly.
Why you don't have to wear a mask if you're under 10, but now you can. Now everybody has to. No kids were in danger of being harmed long term for the majority. I mean, unless it had a comorbidity condition or some illness. But then kids were masked up for years and months. And I mean, it was absolutely insane with no data to back it up.
But and for what? Again, for what? From the very beginning, we know what population this virus was affecting. We knew that. We knew it was largely concentrated. I always go back to March and April when Nico and I were on the phone and we were having these conversations of 2020.
Yeah.
It seemed obvious to me. I mean, we didn't have a lot of information, but the information that we did have seemed to point to a very localized, very limited population of individuals. And you've heard it said a million times, typically the elderly people and people who are immunosuppressed. And it seemed, remember the whole conversation about nursing homes and the scandals involving nursing homes? Okay. So we had that information early on. We also knew that the survivability rate of the virus, CDC was printing this stuff out early on. It was breaking it down by demographics, which then they then very conveniently removed. And then they put them back, when it became politically convenient. The politicization of the CDC is really the great story here, to be honest with you, and really sort of the health and human services and how the politicization of science, I think, has really hurt the credibility of scientists and researchers in the country. I think that's terrible. But go back and look early on how we knew what it was affecting. We knew who it was killing. We knew how many people it was killing. We knew that overall you're looking at greater than 98% survivability rate. If you're a child, it's just that the chances that a child who is healthy is going to subside to COVID is just infinitesimally small, statistically insignificant. It's something like 0.0003 fatality rate. We knew this early on. What the hell are we talking about masks for again? I'm sorry. We're trying to fix a problem that is largely non-existent for huge swaths of the population. This is the government trying to insert itself in the lives of citizens every day in the name of health and safety.
George, the next things that you're going to say is that the mail-in ballots aren't real and that we need to start watching those too.
Oh, no, they're real. That's the problem.
Okay, that may be one of the other topics that we touch on, and we will continue in just a minute on Sidebar.
With reputations as respected high-level prosecutors in Bexar County, the attorneys of LaHood Norton Law Group bring invaluable practical knowledge from the other side of the aisle, using over 70 years of combined experience to strategically advocate clients' rights and pursue the best possible outcome.
I'm Nico LaHood with LaHood Norton Law Group. Have you been arrested or accused of a crime? The LaHood Norton Law Group has the knowledge to defend you regardless of how small or large your case. In Bexar County, anywhere in the state, or even nationwide, we have the knowledge to defend you in federal or state court, no matter how small or large your case. We are trial lawyers with proven success.
Using their 70 years of combined experience to strategically advocate for their clients' rights and pursue the best possible outcome. The LaHood Norton Law Group. For a free consultation, call today, 210-797-7700. 210-797-7700. LaHoodNorton.com.
This is Nico LaHood. If you or a loved one has been arrested or accused of a crime, we can help.
LaHoodNorton.com.
1200 WOAI. I forgot to say it. Tell us what you think. Ask a question. Go to sidebartv.com. Join the conversation. We will be looking at all of your comments.
Because we got Saulo and Dom here helping us, which is what a blessing to have them. We got Kurt working behind the scenes there on the radio side of it. So the team we can't do this without everybody working together. You too, Karen. So thank you, everybody.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's my pleasure to be a part of it. Also, I don't know how many followers we got on Rumble last week, but we need enough followers or subscribers.
What did you say, Saulo? 100? We need to pass 100. We need to pass 100
so that we can stream there as well, just in case anybody decides to mess with.
Are you following on Rumble?
No, not
there.
Yet.
You go. That's it.
I knew he was going to pull me out on that one.
Kurt's not on either. Thanks, Kurt.
No, I'm going to do it as soon as I get out of here today. Yeah. Okay, long COVID. We already have a question or a comment. One, I wish I could remember where it was now, but somebody that is on Facebook talked about how her daughter has long COVID. And I really don't know what long COVID is, and I don't know what the symptoms are. I've heard it. I've seen it in the news, people that just don't feel well for, I guess, after a long time. But what I wanted to ask is, are these victims of long COVID vaccinated, not vaccinated?
Well,
have you read anything
I'll let
about
George,
that? Yes.
Let's let George answer that question because he's really delved into this. But there's a lot of questions. Who diagnosed you? This is just me being a critical thinker, right? Sparring with ideas in your mind. Who diagnosed it? What were the symptoms? Where did it come from? What are they relying on in that diagnosis? What do you do from it? And look, a valid question is this person vaccinated that has this quote-unquote long COVID? What next? You just wait it out? What are they going to do after that? How do you get long COVID if you've been vaccinated or not vaccinated? Where did long COVID come from? What do you? I mean, all these questions, like, you just strap in a label on somebody, and then the answer is put a mask on. Doesn't seem logically consistent to me. I mean, I'm a root cause guy, and I want to get down to what the issue is so we can address it. So, George, I mean, talk about long COVID. Your questions, my point by doing this, Karen, are valid questions.
Yeah,
when you analyze something and critically think, you have to ask tough questions, respectfully, of course. But if you're going to make a valid, accurate assessment, you need all the data.
I know, and I feel bad because this is a joke, and I'm like prefacing by saying this is a joke, but after I had COVID, I found out that I didn't want to come back to work. But it had nothing to do with COVID.
You didn't want to come back.
I just want to, and I appreciate the concern, and I knew the second I would say, look, I don't buy into the long COVID. I think it's mythology, and I hold firmly to that. I say that because clinically, there's sort of the gold standard of clinical development, clinical research work is you need a double-blind, randomized, placebo-controlled study where your placebo is not some other vaccine, but is actually an inert saline product of sorts, a real placebo. And yes, it's randomized, and yes, it's placebo-controlled. There's no study that I know of. I don't know of a single one. Please enlighten me, anybody who's listening in who has any familiarity with basic biology or clinical biology or clinical development. If you worked in pharma, if you know anything about this, please, if you're a good researcher, send me any study you can find, a good, strong, sort of gold standard study to establish that long COVID is a real entity. All of the studies out there are really rather shoddy, in my view. They're observational studies. They fall very short of that standard. And so my concern is that this has become a sort of syndrome that I think can be used to drive a political agenda because it's so poorly supported clinically. And so I was teasing Nico yesterday on the text. I said, look, it's this, I call it a syndrome. It's been used as a catch-all from anything from stomach pain to anxiety to depression to fidgetiness, irritability, insomnia. I mean, my goodness, if you look at these observational studies, and I think many of them are just moronically constructed, it's become a catch-all. And and many of them don't even stop to confirm that the subjects that they're looking at have even had the virus. So I'm annoyed by it because it's caught a lot of traction. Oh, you must have long COVID. Now, where this began, see, again, a little bit of truth mixed with lie. There is, in fact, and I experienced it myself. So in the aftermath of COVID, there's a condition called anosmia, which is a temporary loss of smell.
That's exactly what Deborah mentioned.
There's a loss of smell. There's a loss of taste. There's a sort of prolonged feeling of fatigue that people have experienced. That's real. But the reality is those symptoms have also been attributed to other severe flu-like flu-like episodes. Anytime you have severe influenza-like illness, these things can be characterized as potentially symptomatic of broader influenza-like illness. So the point is, the studies do not adequately isolate this into a well-diagnosed disease or condition called long COVID. And I think everything's just kind of thrown in there. But George, you take the kitchen sink and everything else within 5 feet, and you throw it in there, and it's long COVID. And I'm worried about what that's going to lead to.
We talked about this back when it was. I mean, so right now, in our current time, I mean, the flu is running roughshod over everybody. The flu happens. Flu sucks. I mean, I got some allergies right now, but flu sucks.
Yes.
I mean, it went through my office. It went through our house. 3 of our 4 kids had it. Davi kind of semi-had it, but then she fought it off, thankfully. I didn't get it, thank God. But we're all in the same house. I mean, flu sucks. I mean, we had people in our office that are out for 14 days, and it seemed very, very rough. And then people are responding differently to flu this year than before. There's more questions I have about that. I don't want to start that conversation right now. But then during this COVID insanity that we went through, again, not saying that COVID wasn't real. I mean, I think everyone's had it at least, or hopefully you did at some point. But the flu diagnosis is all of a sudden, there was a joke out there that what happened to the flu? You don't need to get a flu shot anymore. You just get COVID. I mean, because there was no flu, right, George?
Right.
I mean, so what's the distinction? I mean, and I'm asking a sincere question when people ask that. What's the distinction between a COVID diagnosis versus a flu diagnosis. Number one. Number two, you talked about observational studies versus double-blind, random, controlled placebo studies, because there's a lot. Because I mean, if somebody goes out there and starts Googling studies on long COVID, they're going to find a bunch of studies. To your point, you made it very clear, but you're saying they're shoddy when you're looking at someone like yourself, you're a chemist by trade, and you've actually worked on studies, so you're not speaking out of your proverbial ass here. I mean, you're talking from experience. So these are observational versus. I mean, so I think those are a lot of things that people are, including myself, are ignorant to, and then it's easy to kind of pull one over on you if you don't know what you're looking for.
Yeah, I think the benefit of the gold standard study is that it's constructed in such a way that it can segregate confounding factors. In other words, other factors that could contribute to the claim that you're making. That's the point. And unless we have a study that properly isolates for those things, you can make a study say anything. It's kind of like when we talk about.
I've heard that.
So yeah, it's kind of like when we talk about interpreting scripture, right? You can make the Bible say anything you want it to make, and then you read it unless you read it in context. And by reading in context, you've kind of segregate out all of the possible explanations, and you narrow it down to the most probable explanation or probable interpretation of the scripture. What is it most likely to mean based on what the author was writing, or who the author was, or what was the cognitive mindset at the time? So there's various considerations to narrow it down to the proper interpretation. Well, that's kind of how you do a clinical study too. A properly set up clinical study has a way to isolate every possible thing down to the most probable, and they're called confounding factors. And so all I'm suggesting here is, and again, and this is a legitimate challenge, I certainly don't know everything, but it's a question that I have, and I've read up on this pretty substantially. Where is there a decent, properly sample size constructed, randomized, placebo-controlled trial that establishes that long COVID is in fact causative to the kinds of things that people are saying they're experiencing? And I would suggest that while people are experiencing what they're experiencing, that there could be many other factors that have nothing to do with COVID. Again, a lot of these observational studies don't even stop to confirm that the individuals had the virus. So I'm worried about that. And again, why am I worried about it? Because COVID has been so conveniently politicized to what? To censor people.
Yeah.
To
control, take away rights,
to restrict civil liberties, to affect people's livelihoods. How many people have lost their livelihoods because of COVID?
Well, what happens in New York, George, right? In New York, I mean, they have to give people their jobs back. They're paying them back in the military the same way. You're 100% right. I mean, to your point, Karen, you have to ask yourselves, what are they trying to push? And why the mask insanity again? And again, and this is, we're not even touching back on the old conversations we had about what that cloth mask does, and a viral molecule size, and whether it's designed to stop viral molecule versus the bacterial molecule, the size differentiation between them, and what exactly you're stopping or not stopping. I mean, there's all that conversation that needs to be had. So you have to ask yourself why. And then even if there was a mask that could stop a viral molecule spread distribution, are people using it properly? You know, I mean, so there's just so much more behind there.
So the symptoms are real. I want to say that. I don't want to say they're not real.
You're just questioning whether it's long COVID.
That's exactly right. Yeah. Fatigue reduced, which I experienced. Fatigue reduced aerobic capacity for a bunch of weeks or months following infection. Those things are real. What I'm suggesting, when people hear me carefully, is that there's very little to tie that to this phenomenon called long COVID. That's a concern that I have. Go ahead.
Ray said long COVID might be the solution, looking for a problem to pin it on.
I think that's well said, at least clinically. And I'm not suggesting that eventually, because this is the nature of science. We learn and we adjust. But I'm worried at this point that we are getting way behind ourselves. Here we are with mask mandates on the premise of long COVID.
But what about the CDC apology tour?
It's never going to happen, by the way.
Remember the CDC apology tour that they went on with the head of the CDC?
But it was whispered almost.
Well, I mean, it wasn't. I mean, you would think that the backlash would have been overwhelming, but why? Yeah. Because it wasn't covered to the degree it should have.
Right.
Where's the accountability for that? You're talking about people, elderly people, passing away by themselves, people missing birthing opportunities with their children, weddings, all these things. I mean, where's the accountability for that? Hey, we could do things better. We want to keep this great organization great, so there's much to learn. And then Fauci went on his kind of semi-apology tour, but then yet he's still Fauci and he's science and all this crap. I mean, there's no accountability, and then we just kind of say, no big deal. Well, the way you say it is a big deal is one thing. Appropriately, legally, is say no. Or ask questions. I'm not going to do this. No, I'm not. Not without good, like George said, data that I can rely and make decisions, family decisions, health decisions based off of, not because of what you think. And you ask questions and push back on a medical professional, and a lot of them, not all of them, get offended. Like, how dare you question me? Wait, hold on. I mean, people ask me as lawyers in our firm, why are you doing this, or why are you recommending this, or what's happening here? That doesn't offend me. They don't know. I allege that I know, so I'm going to relay that information. I love educating people. I'm not offended if someone questions me at all.
And I'm questioning that the parameters are so broad here, right? The goalposts are so wide, the error bars are so wide that anything can be long COVID, and that's very convenient.
Right.
It can hit anybody at any time. You can have multiple infections of COVID and have built up natural antibodies. You can literally be bulletproof clinically, but no, it can still strike that person, right? So anytime you experience those symptoms, instead of really diagnosing down to if you have diminishing aerobic issues, aerobic capacity, there could be some seriously systemic things wrong with you. But you throw that under long COVID, and you could actually miss that important diagnostic work that can get you back to health. That worries me. And I think I'm always thinking about how there's this notion that if anything is long COVID and you can be infected by it, then the government steps in and you get into this notion that all infections can be controlled. All infections can be stopped. That is a lie. You can't mask yourself away from influenza-like illness.
I think this push of long COVID would have more credibility if they talked about the effects of long vaccine possible injuries as well. I mean, I'm just saying, if you're going to truly be objective, forget about theories and this and conspiracy, anything. I'm a truth seeker. That's it. I'm pro-truth and anti-BS. So that should be in the conversation as well. I mean, we haven't brought up vaccine adverse events reporting system in a long time, VAERS, which is a branch of the CDC.
That's what we should be talking about.
We haven't talked about any of this stuff.
Not positioning long COVID to be a way to maintain corona as a permanent catastrophe.
Right.
That's what long COVID is about, and that worries me.
Okay,
which means permanent control.
I hope we get to continue this because I have some questions myself. It's all coming up next on Sidebar.
Is News Radio 1200 WOAI, San Antonio, an iHeart radio station.
Irene Cara is dead at the age of 63. The Academy Award-winning actress and singer passed away at her Florida home. Her publicist confirmed her passing on social media Friday. Cara is famous for recording the title tracks from films Fame and Flashdance. Her film credits also include the role of Coco Hernandez in Fame, as well as City Heat and Certain Fury. No cause of death was given. Congress might be forced to step in and prevent a pending railroad strike. Union leaders tell Politico that there are still many outstanding issues in the negotiations. The cooling-off period, which does not allow any strike, expires on December 9th, but one Republican senator, Chuck Grassley of Iowa, says lawmakers may have to take action. Amazon workers across the globe staged walkouts on Black Friday. Warehouse employees in dozens of countries rallied for better wages and working conditions. In New York City, protesters rallied outside the Manhattan penthouse of Amazon founder Jeff Bezos to demand better pay. I'm Brad Siegel.
From the WOAI Traffic Center.
A new major accident has I-37 northbound shut down at I-35, actually forcing drivers to merge onto I-35 to get around this accident. You're looking at about a 5-minute delay and growing, and some slow speeds starting from McCullough and Nolan. If you see any traffic problems, call 210-785-2601. I'm Jason Fossig, News Radio 1200 WOAI.
This report is sponsored by the Texas Department of Transportation. TxDOT reminds drivers to be extra cautious when traveling through oil and gas production areas. Drive a safe speed, give big trucks plenty of room, and focus 100% on driving. Put the phone away when you're driving behind the wheel. Be safe. Drive smart.
You've achieved outstanding things in your life. Your home should be your haven. Haven Builders will turn your vision for a luxury home into a reality. After more than a decade helping Fortune 500 companies soar even higher, Haven Builders owner George Araujo has adapted his management expertise and attention to detail to the residential, design, and planning process. Expect a seamless, stress-free process. Expect exceptional quality. Expect to be impressed. Haven Builders. HavenSA.com.
1200 WOAI. This is Sidebar. Nico, did you give your staff off for Thanksgiving, or did you make them work like you did last year?
No, I just worked. What do you mean like last year? What are you talking about? False indictment? No, we were off Thursday and Friday.
Oh,
we mimicked the schedule of the courthouse, so they enjoyed a Thursday, Friday long weekend. Of course, we're taking phone calls. I was on the phone on Friday because some people that have issues that arise and clients and potential clients, they want to talk, so we make ourselves available. But the office was closed on Thursday and Friday, so hopefully they're kind of rejuvenating themselves and getting ready to get back into the fight Monday morning.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, we're going to talk about COVID again because I want to ask. And George, I mean, you were alluding to this, but I think it was James that said, could long COVID just be some other disease in itself that has
virus, right?
Or virus that has some of the symptoms that COVID had, but it's not COVID? I don't understand, because a virus is a virus.
I think that's the concern. That's the concern that I have right now. I think there's a rush. There's a lot of, I think, lazy diagnostic work being done, and people are kind of thrown into this catch-all diagnosis, which is no proper diagnosis in many cases, in my view. If we look at the way observational studies have been constructed, I mean, if you guys want to talk about this, it tends to be kind of boring, and I don't want to get in the weeds in it. But I mean, we can get into it. I can give you some examples of some studies like that. Okay, setting that aside, that is my concern. The concern is that we're not doing the important work, Karen, to get down to the true root cause of a health problem that somebody may have, and it may go undiagnosed because of lazy diagnostics, in my view. And again, you know, why the political inertia around this? So now we're going to have mask mandates as if masks have actually worked. Where's the evidence for that?
Yeah.
I mean, I've asked in here. Well, Nico, you know that we've talked about it every week. It felt like we were talking about nothing but COVID for a while. Remember?
And the only reason why we're doing that, George, is because it kept coming up every week. It's like, man, are we going to talk about anything but COVID and masks and VAERS and vaccine adverse events reporting system and shots and this?
Yes.
It's like, but that was the current discussion of the week.
There was always this elaborate panoply of efforts by the government to leverage COVID to control people and to stifle speech or to restrict movement. It was maddening. And so I remember asking, we were looking at masks at the time, and I was encouraging people to go to rationalground.com at the time, if I remember, which I thought was a great website. Yeah. And they're the only ones that I knew that would almost do a state-by-state comparison of states that were complying with mask mandates to the tune of 95 to 100% compliance.
And the effects, right?
And in those states that were taking kind of a more laxed approach. And then to do kind of a comparison, side-by-side comparison longitudinally, and there was either no difference at all in terms of people contracting the virus between people who were fully masked, 2 masks. Remember the 3-4 mask sort of hysteria that we were going through week by week at the time, and there was just no relationship. There's no statistically significant relationship between wearing a mask and lowering or contracting COVID. And so, in fact, we would argue the opposite. There were plenty of states where compliance was minimal, and people were doing just fine relative to those states where compliance was almost maximal.
But let's not forget that Fauci went from "don't wear these things; they're not going to be effective," because he was actually looking at whatever science we do have from well-established science. In the same month, he went from "don't wear it; we need it for our emergency staff at hospitals and things like that nature," to at the end of the wear 1, then 2, then 3, then 4. So we went from no mask to 4 masks.
But they're even finding emails of him saying that it would make no difference.
No, people should go back and listen to that. March 8th of 2020, I believe it was.
Jerome Adams, too.
I think it was March 8th, and then March 31st was Jerome Adams. And then all of a sudden, there was a complete about-face 2 months later. Science doesn't work that way.
But George, and to Karen's point, I'm sorry, but to Karen's point, wasn't there emails of Fauci saying that he knew it wasn't? So now he's not just wrong. So he's either grossly incompetent, so he can't be science, or he's a liar.
Well,
I mean, there's no accountability. Right. So I think it's normal for someone to say, I'm going to pause this time.
An investigation by the House of Fauci and people in his inner circle at the NIH and the CDC, I think, is entirely appropriate. The impact that these completely irresponsible individuals, I'll say it the nice way, I want to use stronger words, maybe we can on the other half of the program on Facebook. Mm-hmm. It's criminal. It really is. I mean, the number of human lives that were affected by...
Well, he lied. He lied during different committees. I mean, under oath. So that truly is criminal. I mean, I want to break it down objectively, too. Yeah, I agree with you, George.
A willful disregard for true science and for the facts on the ground. and allowing himself, or I would say almost volunteering, to be used for political purposes. I think it's reprehensible, and he should be investigated. I believe he will be. At a press conference this week, much was made about sort of his farewell, right? And he was starting to get just pelted with questions from reporters, and Karine Jean-Pierre,
Stepped
the
in,
increasingly
protective,
incompetent and smug, arrogant, and very uncommunicative, putting it nicely, press secretary, jumps in and decides she's upset because people are speaking out of turn and people are talking over one another, and
People aren't angry and they have questions.
These are legitimate questions. These are reporters who have legitimate questions that everybody's wondering about. They should be asking Fauci these questions and running cover for him. This is nuts. I do hope the House investigates this. This is legitimate. I hope this never happens again.
But you want to talk about accountability. Everybody on the left wants to talk about accountability, but their definition of accountability and who that applies to is conveniently
If it's on
selective.
their list, it's okay.
Absolutely. And so what we try to do on the show, people have asked me, what is the purpose of your show? Well, it's morphed into just wanting to teach people to critically think, true education. And I used this last night on the R-Rated podcast, R-Rated Christianity. It's from Albert Einstein, and I love this definition of it. He says, education is not the learning of facts, right? That you can recite that, but the training of the mind to think. That, in his opinion, was true education from a genius, right? Training your mind to think, to critically think, to spar with ideas in your mind, so you can come up with the most consistent and objective result after you distinguish between every agendas and feelings and emotions or whatever. Are we training people, especially our young people, to think? And we're not, and that's the problem. And part of thinking is what? Is questioning.
Yep.
Is pushing back against authority. Is having this exercise, this ping pong exercise of question and answer. And and the truth should stand firm when it's all said and done. When the smoke clears,
There it is.
you should not question.
And there it is. That's really the crux of the matter here. Is when you question, when you do multivariate analysis, and you look at things from multiple angles, you have a better shot at getting to sort of what we call the inference to the best explanation, right? And you don't get to pick and choose. And I think that's what's happening here with this hysteria with long COVID and masks and jumping to mask policy, is that there are other factors that may explain these symptoms that people are experiencing. That these individuals may share, that supposedly have long COVID, may share other characteristics that affect that outcome. And what I'm proposing is that the studies that we have right now are shoddy in that regard. They do not account for what I call confounding factors or confounding biases. This is the inherent weakness of observational studies. Okay, I hope I haven't said too much on that, but I think I want you guys to think clearly through this. And if you get into a discussion, have some basic important talking points.
George, going back to the mask mandate and them trying to reinstate a mask mandate, I think it was Carlos a minute ago said that he got COVID finally after wearing masks, doing everything that he was supposed to. He got it, went to the VA, and they told him, go home, you'll be fine.
Isn't that crazy?
You'll take care of it. So,
was he vaccinated?
Which is why mask mandates are never going to work, Nico. That's why mask mandates are never going to work now.
No,
the idea that they're even parroting this thing is insane.
Yeah.
But again, this is not really about COVID. I think they're already moving to the next affliction. This is about preparing people. It's preparing. I like to use the phrase, maybe I'll write a book on it, called The Fracturing of the American Mind. Because we've lost our ability to think rationally. And now we've adopted this religion, this cult of safetyism, this notion that it's possible to actually avoid any and all infections. This is an underlying cultic belief that the government will leverage for further control. If the population can actually believe that moronic notion that you can actually control or prevent every single infection, that you can truly prevent every harm or every risk, right, just by listening to mama government, if you can do that, you can be controlled. And I think this is not about COVID. It's about the next means of control of the population. Well, we are dealing with communists, folks. These are communist individuals. These are not your granddaddy's Democrats. They're gone. They have no leverage over this party, okay? These are communists. This is Marxist control. That's not hyperbole.
That's not hyperbole.
Look at the facts on the ground.
When you look at the mindset that's being promulgated and the techniques, so to speak, that are being used, this is a repeat of history.
You can't. That's right. You cannot be a true student of history and not come to that conclusion.
I mean, look, you're talking about this idea of safetyism or whatever it was, and we've talked about this years ago when we were talking about COVID. And I understand in context, Benjamin Franklin was talking about taxation, and there were some other issues, but the idea still holds true. He says any society that will give up a little liberty to gain a little security. Think about that. Any society that will give up a little liberty to gain a little security will deserve neither and lose both. Let that sink in. The idea
The context was different. But the application is a valid application.
Application is the same.
And
I agree.
It's a fair one.
But how do you explain then them, the CDC or maybe HHS continually saying just recently that hospitals are once again struggling with supply and capacity issues, and this is familiar to us. Who is it that's going into the hospital?
Okay.
And who is it that's getting sick?
Is that its own show?
Yeah. So I took in our son last week. I just wanted to make sure it wasn't his appendix. It wasn't. It ended up being gas or whatever. But still, I wanted to make sure because he's 6 and he was young. I went in there and one hospital, I won't mention their name, had like a 6-8 hour wait, and the lady goes, "Look, go to the Children's Hospital across the street, whatever." And then walked in there and everything was fine. Took an X-ray. It was gas and whatever. But I wanted to make sure it wasn't an appendicitis, because I've had some friends that have had that, and I'm ignorant. There it is. I'm ignorant to it, so I went just to make sure he was okay. And it was loaded, but these are people stuck with flu, with strep throat, with allergies, with colds, with bacterial infections. A lot of things going on. But here's a question, Karen, and we'll end on this and go to the break. But there's people out there that there's information out there that if somebody has a compromised immune system due to potentially maybe taking a treatment or a shot that could have weakened your immune system, and now you're susceptible to a lot of other things, because I want to know why flu seems to be affecting people differently these days than it did a year or two ago.
I want to ask about that.
Question. I'm not saying I had the answer, but as a critical thinker, that's a question I have.
Okay, we will continue with that because I want to know about that too. And don't forget, sidebartv.com. You can join us after the show also. We will continue with that. And we'll be right back.
With reputations as respected high-level prosecutors in Bexar County, the attorneys of LaHood Norton Law Group bring invaluable practical knowledge from the other side of the aisle, using over 70 years of combined experience to strategically advocate clients' rights and pursue the best possible outcome.
I'm Nico LaHood with LaHood Norton Law Group. Have you been arrested or accused of a crime? The LaHood Norton Law Group has the knowledge to defend you regardless of how small or large your case. In Bexar County, anywhere in the state, or even nationwide, we have the knowledge to defend you in federal or state court, no matter how small or large your case. We are trial lawyers with proven success.
Using their 70 years of combined experience to strategically advocate for their clients' rights and pursue the best possible outcome. The LaHood Norton Law Group. For a free consultation, call today, 210-797-7700. 210-797-7700. LaHoodNorton.com.
This is Nico LaHood. If you or a loved one has been arrested or accused of a crime, we can help.
LaHoodNorton.com.
1200 WOAI. This is Sidebar. Okay, we're going to continue that conversation about the flu because I have lots of questions about that. But if we could...
I'm not saying I have the answers. I'm just critically thinking
Well,
through
I
this,
know, but
Karen.
that's what gets us through this. We talk about it, ideas come up. We have so many people that have been talking about their own experiences with what they think is long COVID and how it has affected their thinking, their smell and taste. And so we will continue with that. But I just thought maybe since...
We can continue that on Facebook
Yes,
Live
on
after
Facebook
this?
Live. And remember, if you want to find us, you can join us on a bunch of different platforms. But all you have to do to find us is go to sidebartv.com. That's sidebartv.com. And I promise I'll pay more attention to you. Ray, I saw a couple of your questions. Deborah, and I saw some of yours too. But we're going to discuss them in just a second. I guess 14 minutes anyway. Going back to Thanksgiving, if we could just wrap up with that. I mean, it did make me feel sick and sad when I was watching Joy Reid and others just bashing Thanksgiving. And I was thinking, wow, this is a time, even though I uninvited several of my family members, but this is a time that people usually get together and have a meal together, which it seems...
But it used to be a festival. So the first Thanksgiving in 1621 was a festival, and it was the local Native American tribe. And look, we don't have 13 minutes. It doesn't do justice to this truly American hero called Squanto, who truly saved the Pilgrims when they came. Remember, they landed at 102 roughly people on the ship, some pilgrims, some strangers, people that were getting on because they were funded and they were given permission to come over from the king, even though they were coming from Holland. They lost, the only 53 were left after that first winter. Where they landed in Plymouth is where Squanto's family and his tribe used to be before he was taken into captivity. He gets sold in Spain, gets bought by some Franciscan monks. He learns English, comes back. I mean, there's a fascinating story. There's a fascinating story where there's providential interaction, like divine appointments. When you really look at this, I guess you could say, oh, that's just chance. And Squanto speaks English. He ends up living with the Pilgrims, teaches them how to fish and plant and grow, because that's where his tribe used to live. And then they all died from a disease when he was out in captivity. Arguably, if he wasn't sold into slavery, he would have died with them also. When he came back, they weren't there, so he went to another local tribe. I think there's a chief Massasoit and all this other stuff that brought in. Long story short, the first Thanksgiving, that first one, they were thankful. For what? They lost half of their people when they came over. They were scared because they were thankful for a divine appointment as Squanto, for them having an abundance. I mean, they were growing. They brought over 90 braves. So when you talk, I want to ask Joy Reid, what genocide are you talking about from these Pilgrims? Who did they kill? Out of the 53 of them remaining, there was only 22 men. And there's 90 braves coming over. These strong, scrapping, these are people of the land. They know what to do. And they have a 3-day festival of games and shooting games and wrestling matches and eel and cod and sea bass and fish and deer and fowl, the turkey. I mean, all this wonderful food for 3 days. There's prayer, there's fellowship. I mean, I would love Thanksgiving to be a 3-day festival. But they were thanking God for his providential hand in a tough situation. They really understood Scripture, Romans 8:28, God works all things out for the good of those who love him and are called by his purpose. They really understood that idea. They focused on being grateful for how God brought them through that, because they could have been thrown off course many times over. They had those 66 days at sea were many storms, or a number of storms, and they ended up here. And then Squanto happened to be here after coming. I mean, there's just, again, I'm just giving you Cliff Note version, but the first Thanksgiving was one of gratitude to a transcendent God for providing them food, connections, fellowship with the locals. There was the actual peace treaty. The Pilgrims had the longest standing peace treaty from Americans, or white people, quote unquote, with Native Americans. George was saying last night it lasted somewhere between 30 and 40 years, which was the longest peace treaty that is still standing. That means something. So I want to ask Joy Reid, where was the genocide? You have the Pilgrims, 22 men, 90 braves. There's 3 days of fellowship, food, fun, sports. That's why people watch football, maybe. I mean, it was in gratitude to a transcendent God, and that tradition lasted up until I guess by 1815, what I've studied and read. I mean, there was something like 1,400 days of prayer and fasting nationally by governors and local officials and presidents and things. By 1815, 1,400 roughly. I mean, there was an acknowledgement of a thankfulness to a transcendent God for the blessings of this country. Then, lastly, and I'll let George wrap this up, the Mayflower Compact is something that we should study. I mean, and I'm going to just bring up, I'll just read the first 2 sentences. when they landed in Plymouth, they were heading towards Virginia. The storm brought them over to Plymouth in that area. There was no charter in place. They wanted to there was no governance. There was no civil government. So they said, we got to put together this Mayflower Compact. In the name of God, amen. We, whose names are unwritten, the loyal subjects of our dread sovereign Lord King James, by the grace of God, of Great Britain, France, and Ireland King, defender of the faith, etc., having undertaken for the glory of God and advancement of the Christian faith and honor of our king and country, a voyage to plant the first colony in northern parts of Virginia, do by the presence, solemnly and naturally in the presence of God. Okay, well, they didn't make it to Virginia, so they're saying, this is where we're going. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to acknowledge God. We have to acknowledge our king who gave us permission, the king of the land of England, to come over here. But for the advancement of the Christian faith and for the glory of God, that's in the Mayflower Compact. Arguably, this is the first pure document and governing document of these new United States, even though they weren't the United States at the time. I understand that. But remember, other colonies had charters from England, so they weren't under a pure new charter, and this was it. So I'm sorry for the speed round.
No,
but I mean, there's
love
just
that
so much to
information.
dissect here. So again, I go back to Miss Reid, and I'll say it that way. Where's the genocide of the Pilgrims of Plymouth and the first Thanksgiving? And why should this be a day of mourning and not a day of celebration and gratitude?
Imagine a world where facts matter. Then everything Nico just said would be what you would expect a teacher to be teaching young kids in elementary school and high school, and yes, even colleges. But that's not going to happen because the American educational system has been completely hijacked by a left-wing cabal of activists posing as teachers. This is an objective fact. And Joy Reid is a partisan hack who does their bidding on television. Period. End of story. She couldn't give. I wish I could use stronger language. She couldn't care less about what Nico just said. It's completely irrelevant. It's embedded in facts, and this is factual stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, we have manuscripts, thanks to the work of William Bradford, who was second governor of the Plymouth colony. On Plymouth Plantation remains the most detailed narrative of the things that happened to the Pilgrims from day one, from the time they came over on the voyage. He actually talks about the conditions in Holland. He talks about the conditions on the way over here. He talks about 1620. He talks about the times preceding up to the Thanksgiving 3-day festival in 1621. He talks about the relationship with the Indians. I don't know how in the world, Nico, you can walk away from that narrative.
I don't know.
And conclude anything less than this was a mutually beneficial,
yes,
and mutually respectful relationship between the natives, the Wampanoag Indians, under the leadership of Massasoit. And
you made a great point last night, George. You said the Massasoits benefited also because there was other warring tribes.
Wampanoags.
The Wampanoags, yeah, but Massasoit was the chief.
Oh, yes.
Right? Yeah, and so he benefited from the numbers, the sheer numbers of the Pilgrims, because remember, there were tribes conquering each other. This wasn't, forget about the Europeans. I mean, they were conquering each other, these tribes, and committing atrocities.
Yeah, it's a political relationship.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there's power in numbers, and Massasoit's numbers had depleted significantly because of plague. And so, and we talked a lot about that last night in terms of genocide. This is just BS. I mean, there was no genocide. It is mythological. It doesn't exist. The exact opposite was the case. If you look at Bradford's narrative, you can see a deep respect, actually a love and admiration for the contributions of the natives to them. In fact, it documents well. That's a few decades later.
I got it. What I'm saying, but they didn't steal land. They actually purchased it. Go ahead, sorry.
The two issues are related, though. It's an important point because they land on shore. A few years earlier, there were 2,000 Indians there, the Patuxet, which were the tribe of Squanto. Those people have been wiped out by plague. I mentioned sources yesterday from the CDC to show that the major contributor to the wipeout of what's called pre-Columbian Indian populations. That means all of the Indian population prior to the arrival.
Columbia.
Exactly right. Was wiped out to the tune of 98% as a result of plague. There's been a lot of research on what it is that actually contributed to that. The CDC put out a paper looking at the years of 1616 to 1619 to try to identify. They concluded leptospirosis, which is an infection that arises from the contamination of reservoirs, land and water reservoirs, as a result of rat urine from European ships.
Wow.
Okay, this isn't genocide. This is plague.
Right.
So the genocide thing is complete BS. The idea of imperialism and stolen land, that is nonsense. No such thing happened. These pilgrims were on land that nobody wanted because it was seen as cursed.
Yes,
That's the point.
I was going to say.
The land was cursed in the view of the Indians.
Because of all these Indians that had died.
And it actually ended up being actually very redemptive. Because here you have these pilgrims, and they're surviving. And they're giving thanks. It's left out, and you can see it on Plymouth Plantation in the manuscript. They're not just having a great time with food and fellowship, but they're fellowshipping over the open reading of the Bible together. These are pagans, and they're listening in on this. And a lot of Native Americans came to a saving faith in the living God. That's wonderful.
And
that's
in Bradford's
bad thing.
And Bradford's writings, he talks about Squanto, because Squanto lived with them. And because of his time with the monks, the friars, whatever, the Franciscans, and then also with the pilgrims, on his death, he got sick, and he ended up on his deathbed. He says, "Pray for me that I go to the white man's God and to heaven, so I may see you again." I mean, there was an affinity there. There was a friendship and fellowship there. This was 3 days of fellowship and feasting and faith, and they were exposing the natives to the faith, the Christian faith, and a lot of converts, like George said. This is now. Look, we can talk at another time. I know we're going to wrap up here in a second, but we can talk about Jamestown from 1607 leading up to 1619 and those first quote unquote they were slaves. I mean, slaves going to Jamestown in 1619, but in Jamestown, slavery was actually banned. It was illegal to have slaves, even though Jamestown had some horrific things happen there. And the leadership, remember, that's the whole John Smith and Pocahontas and all that story, that stuff that people hear about.
Yeah,
there.
we had individuals that went rogue.
Yeah, that's exactly. And so Jamestown, but there's a whole distinction between Jamestown
Thomas Hunt.
and Plymouth. Yeah, Thomas Hunt was a evil bastard. And so all that to say is we have to make that distinction, but I push back on Joy Reid and all this narrative because it's just deceptive. It's not a mishandling of history, because you have to willfully be deceptive to distort the first Thanksgiving and the interaction between the local natives and the pilgrims and what they actually went through and their toil and their journey to get to the narrative going forward. But the bottom line is this: we have a rich tradition of Thanksgiving. We have a rich tradition of thanking a transcendent God with these inalienable rights that got into the Constitution, right? The right to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. These inalienable rights that are endowed on us by a creator, not by humans, not by natives, not by Europeans, by God. And that tradition is rooted in Thanksgiving. And it should be taught and studied.
Absolutely.
And then people make a decision on how they want to treat that. But to lie and to push a false narrative is deceptive. So hopefully, guys, join us on Facebook Live. We're going to transition. I'm just going to run to the restroom, and we'll hope to see you on Facebook Live. Have a blessed week.
The preceding show was paid for by the LaHood Norton Law Group. The views and opinions expressed are those of the advertiser, not necessarily represent those.
But no. You know what? I do need to ask you something, Salo. I know we started, but we have a couple of people on that have asked, okay, I got Rumble, but now how do I subscribe to Rumble? Like our page, Sidebar, and then that will make you a subscriber. Okay, that's as easy as that. But remember, if you know anybody that hasn't watched and you want them to join sidebartv.com, they can join the conversation. Of course, you should follow and like and share sidebartv.com because that's where you can find us. And, before we stop, Nico, you said something about the flu, and you wanted to talk about what is going on with the flu. Because a lot of people have it, but
I have questions.
There's nothing going on.
I can't tell you how many people have come to me and said, man, the flu really kicked my ass this year, worse than it has before. And I said, okay, well, my question is, are you vaccinated for the flu? Yes, some no. Okay. Well, and some people, were you vaccinated for COVID? Some yes, some no. And then I'm just a common sense person. I would do a chart. Flu, kicked my ass this year, worse than ever before for them. These are the statements they're making. Flu vaccine, how many in the past, this year? COVID vaccine, how many? 1, 2, 3, 4, 20, whatever it is. And then, just to look at, now that's not a study, that's just observations, yes. Right? But I think that would lead someone like George, a chemist or a scientific mindset, to produce or do some type of study, deeper study to find out. Because there is a point to be made by not me, I'm listening to them, that says that if you have, it's called negative efficacy, and I guess George can explain what that means, that if you had the certain shot or certain vaccine, because of the mRNA and the way it works on you, and it actually breaks down your immune system, and now you're susceptible for other illnesses aside of COVID, that your immune system would normally deal with differently. Look, the last week when my wife started, we were surrounded by flu and this and that, and she started to get a little raspy, and we do like colonial silver and just throw up the vitamin D3, extra vitamin D3, and extra zinc and things like that, and then of course healthy eating, and she fought it off. But sleep is the biggest part for her. We don't sleep great. It's one thing we don't do well, and so she slept and she fought it off. Thank God, by God's grace. Then her mom showed up and her sister, and they got sick. So we're surrounded by them next, because they traveled from Mexico over here, and thank God we were fine too. So all that to say is I'm an observer. I want to see. I have questions. I want to think through these things because I want to come up with a solution. I just want to everybody talk out of their ass and everybody think they know what they're talking about. I want to have solutions to this. So that's my questions. I'm not saying I have the answers, Karen. I'm just saying I think it's interesting, and I want to ask these questions to somebody if there's anybody that has the answers. And I don't know.
I want to know that too because there are.
And begin.
No, okay, George.
There's about 10 questions in that statement.
I know, brother.
Which question do you think is most important?
Which
isolate
having had the COVID having the COVID vaccine affect your chances? Yeah,
compromise your immune system for the flu or some other virus.
Well, the answer is yes and no. Okay. This is what we. This is
that means he doesn't know.
No, this is what I hate to say it because I'll sound Faucian. It's what the science is saying. But look, the concept of original antigenic sin is what's concerning here, otherwise known as immune imprinting. This has been known since epidemiology came up with the term in the 1960s, and this is just reality. It's how it works. The way it works is you get a vaccine, and that vaccine is going to produce or induce the creation of antibodies. And so as a child, for instance, you will produce titers of antibodies against the initial strain of the virus that you contract, okay? And so the thinking is that is a good thing.
What are titers?
Because
you told me before, but for the audience.
They're just antibody levels.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, antibody concentration levels. And so that's seen as a good thing because now your body has this kind of memory. And an immune response is usually a combination of B cells and T cells, different type of immune cells, but you need them both. And there's a memory aspect to it. So the body's going to remember that. So the next time you contract the virus, it's going to be able to induce a much quicker, more robust response against an antigen. And so that sounds really good, right? The problem is what happens if, because your vaccines it's an artificial stimulation of these antibodies. It's obviously not natural. You're not contracting the virus naturally and resolving it naturally.
Which is called the wild virus, right?
Right.
Just to make sure terms are used right.
And so it induces the creation of these antibodies. Now I have lots of clinical problems with the process because your body, when you contract a virus naturally, will expunge, sort of resolve it. It'll process this thing out. It'll get it out of your system. Yeah, it'll produce an antibody response, but the body will also clean that out. It won't leave any vestiges of that virus in there. It'll purge it. And we know that because the body works that way. I'm less clear about that with vaccine-induced antibody production processes. We don't know. In many cases, we don't know how long it takes for the body to purge itself of these what I call vaccine adjuvants, which are materials that are in vaccines to help induce a much more robust immune response. And it's believed by quite a few researchers that some of these responses are excessive, that it locks the body into a constant mode of attack, right? And that can lead to inflammatory responses. The body never gets a rest, Karen. That's what's going on
That
here.
sounds like long COVID.
Well, when in doubt, it's long COVID. But so there's a lot of interesting questions here, but I think the crux of the matter is that vaccines induce this initial response to the initial virus, and then that becomes kind of the standard bearer for future viruses, okay? Now, that can be a really great thing if you get the same strain later. But what happens if you get a more...
What are the chances of that even happening?
A more harmful strain. Now,
Yeah.
the reason we kind of made out pretty well here is because subsequent variants have been less concerning. Omicron was much less concerning to us clinically than the original Delta variant. You might recall that, right? And this is, I kind of predicted this from the very beginning. This is not unusual. It's not unusual for subsequent variants to be less formidable in terms of their harm to the human body. So we kind of dodged a bullet there, right? So the concern that I have with immune imprinting original antigenic sin is that these mRNA vaccines are locking the body to a specific set of antibodies geared toward the original variant, right? And it locks the body in that mode. I think there's evidence to suggest that the body never really comes off of that. Now, it's in sort of locked mode, but the problem is that the antibody titers are decreasing less and less and less over time. This is why we saw antibody titers dropping after about 3 or 4 months. Remember?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So now you get
booster number 2.
That's what I was. That's exactly what I was going to ask.
5,
Yeah. So it's this sort of robust response, and then it vanishes within a few months, and so hence the boosters. Now you get a new booster, and by the way, there's really no difference between the initial boosters and the original formulation.
For the Delta.
Yeah, you're just getting another
variant.
kick. You're just getting another antibody production mode. But so what are you going to do? You're going to be on boosters for the rest of your life? That's not how this is supposed to work. That is not how vaccines are supposed to work.
That's not the way it was sold.
No.
For sure.
And so, but what's not being properly analyzed is long-term safety effects of those things. In other words, we're saying, yeah, it produces antibodies, but I ask at what cost? At what cost is it producing antibodies? And so the attitude has been, don't worry about it. Don't worry, it's fine. It's science. That's bullshit. Clinical medicine doesn't work that way. We care about long-term concerns, and we're not safety evaluating those things. What I'm concerned about is that what negative efficacy is about is by locking in the body against a set variant, that what happens if you get a more concerning variant, not just COVID, but some other influenza-like illness? What happens then? Because your body is now blinded. It is much less effective at generating antibodies against that new variant because it's locked in on a set of antibodies against a specific variant. Do you see my point?
I do.
And so in a sense, the vaccines actually can make it more or less efficacious. They can actually make the immune system less productive, less effective. We need to study those things. I'm not claiming that's what happened.
I look at it,
I believe that is quite possible.
The way in my simple mind, it's like, okay, I'm training for a fight, and your immune system through this vaccine is just studied your left jab. The problem is you have a right cross, an uppercut, a right uppercut, a left hook, a right hook, a kick, a knee, an elbow. But I'm just focused on your left jab. And so I'm susceptible because I'm
Totally
only focusing
vulnerable.
and defending. I mean, that's just me just
Yeah.
trying to translate it to
No,
someone as
that's
stupid as
that's
myself.
beautiful.
I mean,
get that.
That's kind of the analogy.
Right. And the reason this matters, Nico, is because these types of viruses mutate readily.
That's right.
No, we've dodged
skilled
the
fighters,
bullet.
right?
Subsequent variants have been less harmful. Great. So we say, isn't that wonderful? The vaccines are working. No, you don't really have a prize fighter on your hands. You've got a lightweight, really, that you're fighting against. You've got a variant that's really not hurting. Now look at that headline for a moment. Can you read that for me for a moment?
Pfizer initiates phase 3 study of the mRNA-based influenza vaccine. So
right.
what does that mean?
This is a September headline that says that Pfizer's not going to take they're going to take the mRNA vaccine platform and they're going to try to adapt it, wait for it, to influenza, to flu, because it was so effective against COVID. Why wouldn't they do that?
What?
Now that's
Where
nuts.
does that thinking come from?
That's completely nuts. If you think that COVID experienced mutagenicity, you've seen nothing. Flu viruses are notorious for mutating.
They can't even get the vaccine right.
They're at the best 25%.
So the issues that I
just
just raised, imagine them when it comes to influenza. This is nuts.
without brother, I love the knowledge, and this is the expert witness we brought in initially.
you brought
and then
up the
got
food,
screwed.
brother,
No,
and I think it's a good
this
topic.
is good stuff. But when you talk about a phase 4, because you brought up an article on phase 3. So there's animal testing, right? First in man, and then I know there's post marketing. What are the 4 phases? Just in headline, just so people can understand when you say phase 4.
Well, there's an animal tox stage that you appropriately mentioned. That's your preclinical stage. You want to make sure, it's not killing animals.
And talk about how long these stages are.
Well, yeah.
Also,
It's looking at animals. Yeah, and that can, depending on how much you know, if you have a pre-existing drug that's similar in terms of compound structure, you can leverage that work from before, and it can cut your analysis time. But if it's a brand new analyte, if it's a brand new entity, it can run anywhere from a few months to a few years. I mean, really, it just depends. A few months to a few years in preclinical testing, and then you do what Nico mentioned. You go into phase 1. They're first in man.
So animal tox is not phase 1?
It is not phase 1. It's preclinical.
So phase 1, let's just break this down. We never talked. This is preclinical. So if we're going to do it, preclinical animal tox, few months to few years. Phase 1 is first in man. How long is that?
Phase 1 is safety oriented. Period. It's what you do. And the traditional study makeup has people being locked down because the focus is safety.
Right.
So you lock them down because
How long is that?
You're concerned, and that can last anywhere from a couple of months to 6 to 8 months to a year. I mean, the shortest one that I've seen. I mean, you can have one that lasts 30 days. Now, again, this presupposes that what you're analyzing, Nico, is just a different application, but maybe it was an existing drug. And so we have already all kinds of safety data.
that you can
If it's a brand new deal, I mean, you should take as long as it takes. It can go 8 months, 9 months, 10 months to a year. And they're very, very, very expensive, by the way. If you wonder why safety studies are really a great, if why somebody would want to avoid long safety studies, they will break the bank.
Yeah.
They're very, very
So
expensive.
if they're not going to make money on it, they're not going to do it, bottom line. So what's phase 2?
So then you go into phase 2. It tends to be kind of a hybrid of safety and efficacy.
Okay.
Where now you're
What is it?
partially
Is it called
concerned about
something?
safety.
What is it
That's
called?
kind of phase 2 is typically a hybrid, a mesh between safety concerns, but mostly now you're transitioning to efficacy, where you're seeing if that particular drug is actually effective in treating that particular disease that you're analyzing.
Got it.
Okay, you get through that, and that can last a year, and then you get through that, and you get into your longest stint, which is phase 3, and that's entirely efficacy based.
All efficacy.
All efficacy, yeah.
Does it work?
And then you start getting into stability studies there, and it's a robust period. You start seeing if the compound's even stable, and they do accelerated stability with heightened temperatures to make sure it's not breaking down. And of course, studying patients, and they're usually a lot of patients.
How long
There's
is that?
thousands of patients usually, depending on the scope of the drug that you're developing. It can last a couple of years, and it should. You're looking at anywhere from 2 to 3 to 4 years on a phase 3.
And then phase 4 is post-marketing, right?
Phase 4 is post-marketing surveillance.
And this is
phase
the
4
part,
and
like
phase-
what is the long-term effects, right?
Yeah, that's right. So at this point, you've got your NDA.
What is NDA?
A new drug application, and that's been approved by the FDA, and now you can launch the sucker for public distribution.
That's helpful, right, Karen? When you talk about
yeah,
phase 4.
but that's years. That's
Oh,
years.
how long is post-marketing?
Who's counting,
But how long
Karen?
is
Well,
post-marketing?
Well, that
But it
varies,
just-
brother.
I bring
Give
up
me range.
That
Sorry,
varies
Karen.
for.
What is it?
No, I mean, it can last a year, a couple of years, 3 years.
5 years?
Sure it can.
So 1 year to 5 years.
And
I mean,
so,
right now.
just to bring up, I mean, it hasn't even been 3 years, and
heavens
people
no.
have been getting
Heavens no.
all of these vaccines.
No.
after
By
vaccines.
the time, hold on. We just went. I did this intentionally. So think about and you could tell that George wanted to talk for a long time because he's got so much to share. No, it's okay. I'm not saying that to bust your chops. I'm just saying that I wanted to get through the kind of clip note
So
version.
exciting.
Well, that's another topic. So, but remember, by the time the vaccines came out, they had 2 months of studies.
Yeah, exactly.
2 months. So you have your preclinical is 3 months to 3 years. They did 2 months of total
And then just
studies.
started
and then
injecting
boom,
it.
injecting. But under that emergency use authorization, they were protected. And it didn't matter.
Well, keep in mind that the latest boosters were tested on nothing but a couple of mice. So there's no human subjects there.
You've been called a raton
So-
before, right, Salo?
Take it easy there, Salo.
What would be the
But this
difference,
is-
though,
this is
between an mRNA COVID vaccine and an mRNA flu vaccine? Why would you even need
No,
both? And would you get
it's
them both?
because the proteins are different. You'd be
Okay.
looking at flu. Be looking at flu.
But no
flu
matter
viruses, and you'd be basically synthesizing flu proteins using.
But why I'm asking this is it didn't work for
I
COVID.
I understand, but you asked what's the difference.
Yes.
That's it. It's the proteins are different. So the whole technology is premised on coming up with synthesizing mRNA outside of the body. It's done in a lab. Synthesizing mRNA, messenger ribonucleic acid, right, which is genetic material, and the code for making proteins of that particular flu. And then you'd be injecting that. It would be aided by a carrier molecule called an LNP, a lipid nanoparticle. That is sort of, imagine a little capsule that basically escorts that mRNA to the body's protein-making machinery, the body cells.
But
Then
it's
your body,
confusing because if it didn't
same
work
process.
for COVID, then why would it work for the flu?
I think that's the
crap
rub.
about that.
I think that's the issue.
makes money.
I think the issues that we've addressed here that have not been satisfactory, I think studied. What are those long-term effects? VAERS is not a be-all to end-all. There are problems with VAERS. There are. It mostly because of underreporting, grotesque.
Well, because one, people don't know to report.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
we
and
talked
they're
about
not-
this
and
in the
they're not
past,
reporting.
Karen. We talked. There was a 2010 actual study in the Pilgrim Research Group or whatever. It wasn't from Harvard, but they were out of Harvard, and they said something like only 1% back in 2010. There's no reason to not believe that that's not still consistent data. That only 1%, up to 1 to 10%. Some studies have as high as 10%, but that study, from my understanding, was around 1% report. Now think about that. So the numbers that we kept going over month after week after week from the VAERS, the Vaccine Adverse Events Reporting System, was truly 1% of a bigger problem. So if you do the math and multiply that and figure out what exactly that covers, I mean, it's alarming to the adverse events from minor to serious injury to deaths. I don't know what the latest numbers are, George, but they're horrific. And there's numbers
And this
just
is
towards
self-reporting.
COVID. Self-reporting within a short period of time. So then this is where the post-marketing and phase 3 and efficacy and all this other stuff, if they didn't report within a, 2 to 4 week period, George can correct me, well then even if it was a year later, how do you tie it back to the vaccine? If it was 6 months later, and there's a lot of things happening. But this is why George is saying it's not that it's not reliable because it's a bunch of BS. It's not reliable because it's not as accurate as it needs to be to protect people and make good decisions.
Yeah, that's true. And I really like Alex Berenson's perspective on this because, I remember when he was decrying it. I remember I was decrying it on this show.
Yep.
The idea that Pfizer and Moderna had these large trials that they started, the initial trials. I mean, it's great to have these wonderful trials. They had like 70,000 people or something like that. But then they ruined the trials. Why?
Well,
because
explain
they
that.
gave...
Hold on, but to the person that doesn't know, explain that because this is a big point you're going to make.
Well, they ran the trials as they should. They took populations of individuals, they tracked them to see if they developed, and there was actually a placebo-controlled group, a cohort, and they had individuals that they were testing.
So some that had it and some that didn't. Listen here.
That's right.
Go ahead.
And they had, and so that's the way you should do. You should have two different sets of groups that you're comparing for outcomes, and this. It had some promise back in 2020, the way it was structured. And I'm talking about the large trials. I'm not talking about the original safety trials from Moderna, which were a sham, but I'll set that aside for a moment.
So they had thousands of patients, Pfizer and Moderna, in these large trials, and then they ruined them. And they ruined them because they decided that they were going to give everybody who had placebo shots the vaccines. So now,
do you understand that, Karen?
Yeah.
So now let that sink in.
That is ruining
Your
the
what did they
study.
do? They destroyed.
So now what do you do on the post-marketing observation?
They
so now
destroyed
you don't know
any
what the hell
chance.
happened.
No study.
Now you have no distinction between who had the shot or not. The idea is to keep them pure.
Why would
'Cause
they do that? I
well,
mean, I know
So
the answer
if I
to
had been
that.
sitting
but
at a round table
Speculate.
in pharma, I, as I often did when people were sane, I'd ask. I mean, seriously, we've destroyed any chance for long-term safety data. What the fuck are we doing? Seriously, this is insane.
Say it, baby.
People are going to get hurt.
yeah.
I mean, this is nuts. So now Alex Berenson and I pulled up a piece and I love it. So to Karen, he's saying, he would say to you, hey Karen, whether the mRNA flu shots work hardly matters at this point. Interesting perspective.
Who's this from?
Alex Berenson.
Yeah, I like
I mean,
Alex.
he's been bitching about it, and he should. He says what matters is that the companies are now running more large, yet unruined that we know of, placebo-controlled and randomized trials on mRNA vaccines for the influenza stuff. Regulators have a new chance to examine long-term safety data.
And
Now,
At the expense of humans.
Influenza is not COVID, but if we continue, if we actually do this right, and we don't screw up the placebo group, we can actually see what happens long term.
But do they want that?
So he says, regulators must seize this opportunity. The FDA needs to insist that the companies provide at least 2 full years of safety data on every trialist before it will even consider their applications. It should also ask the companies to collect detailed pre- and post-shot heart data on all men in the trials under 40 and maybe 25% of the remaining trialists. The FDA has every right to do so. Regulators demand changes in trial design all the time. That's true. The COVID shots were rushed to market in 2020 because COVID was supposedly an emergency requiring an immediate solution. Remember Operation Warp Speed, which I think is really Trump's greatest Achilles heel.
Don't even get me started about that. But
I won't, brother, because then you'll get me started.
I know. But think about what he's saying. So look, the fact remains, and you can look at health insurance and life insurance companies. There's data out there. There's these different data points. People between 18 and 40, whatever years, they're just all-cause mortality is up. There's data for, are they vaccinated? How many boosters do they have? What's up with these kids? I mean, teenagers, young adults with
dropping dead.
Cardiomyositis or whatever.
Myocarditis.
Thank you.
Sad.
I mean, heart problems from people that don't have heart issues. They weren't born with it. So it just begs the question. And then they have been vaccinated. It begs the question. Now, early studies showed that there was blood clotting issues and there was some heart. I mean, but then that wasn't emphasized, and the information was censored.
Yeah.
So people couldn't
It
make
just disappeared.
educated, well-informed decision. You combine that with fear, ignorance, meaning
Yes.
not knowing, then you have stuff like this. And this is why it's inexcusable. And I know it needs to be forgivable at some point as a Christian, but it's inexcusable. There has to be accountability because there has been some grave ramifications of it. Grave from people getting injured. I mean, and then all these stories are being censored. Why? Let the truth, let people speak. People can decipher through that. Let the court of public opinions, deliberate on all the evidence being presented to them, and people can make up their own decisions. I'm a big citizen, small government guy, so you can do whatever the hell you want to do in your own private home, make your own medical decisions. But your rights end where my nose begins, as someone said years ago, right? And this forcing of mandates and masks and vaccines and jabs and people losing their jobs and people being canceled and this and that and fake news, all this stuff that they've been yelling at people about, that now we know, to Joe Rogan's point last year, that you, and he said it differently, you some bitches were wrong.
Yeah.
Where's the accountability on the other side? Because Joe did everything opposite that they said to do, from ivermectin to this to that to whatever antibody treatment, and he was better in what? One day he said he was bragging about it, laughing at these people when everybody else is on ventilators. So all I'm saying is when you have censorship and you don't have the free exchange of ideas and free speech, you have stuff like this.
And it also makes me kind of leery about when they come out with a new drug that says people can take this at home to treat their COVID, and that's that Paxlovid that they're now trying to push. There's
What is it?
commercials. I don't know.
What is it like?
It's an
antiviral, right?
Do you
Sounds
know,
like- what is
George?
it?
Yeah, that's right.
An antiviral.
And I think
Go figure.
I think it's far more successful clinically, far more. I mean, it's not even close. Far more promising and successful than this mRNA scam. And this is a guy. I'm into mRNA technology. I think it's amazing. But man, we need to put the brakes on. The idea that went to market. This is insane.
And to think that there is just
I'm
an
telling you, this is-
antiviral that is working to help people without having to get any vaccine.
I have no reason at this point to say anything but positive things, neutral to positive things on Paxlovid. I think we need more work, but it is far, far better than the mRNA scam.
Is that Paxlovid? How could that come to market so quick? Has that been around for a while? I'm ignorant to Pax because it sounds like another antiviral, ivermectin, that had been around for that had a safety stuff.
Let's back up. It's the gene therapy stuff, brother.
Okay,
yeah.
So
I mean,
what is the difference? What's Paxlovid? Where did it come from? Because I don't know.
No, they've been. I mean, this wasn't a 2-month thing. They had been researching it for a while, but I mean, this antiviral technology has been around forever.
Okay.
And
is that what you're talking about, where you can borrow other technology?
Yeah, right.
And that can shorten a phase.
This
or
is not a new administration. Okay. No, I'm not talking politically. I'm saying the administration route. Antiviral science has been around for a long time. It's not mRNA technology. That's freaking brand new. Yeah. I mean, really, I can't think of a single What other mRNA product has ever come to market? Never. There's been plenty of antivirals that have come to market. All I'm suggesting is the technology is largely untested. And I mean largely, virtually overwhelmed, almost completely untested. And they're dumping it. We're talking over 1 billion people, perhaps 2 billion people now, anywhere between 1 and 2 billion people with a technology that is largely untested. This is reprehensible. It's ethically criminal.
As
night and day between in those terms, Nico, between mRNA and Paxlovid.
Wow.
And so I can't believe they're even thinking about this for influenza.
Well, I can't believe that they approved this for children. You're an adult. You're a grown ass man or woman. You do what the hell you want to do with your body, and then you can pick your choices. You can't pick your consequences, right? That applies to all of us. But to your children, to a cohort of individuals that are virtually unscathed by this thing. Again, if you have a kid with leukemia or something horrific or some comorbidity, genetic or the disease from you, that's different. That doesn't mean you take the vaccine, by the way, but that's completely different. But why would you even subject? This is where I just speak out openly.
Fear.
Why would you even subject a child
uneducated
to this bullshit?
Fear.
I mean, be a good steward of your children. I mean, and don't be driven by so much fear when you just look at data. Forget Nico LaHood or George Ruse or Karen Klaus or Sal O'Dom, anybody here. Just look at data. Okay, my kid is 5, 7, 3, 12, whatever. Are 5, 7, 3, 12-year-olds dying from this? Are they getting... They're not.
No.
What is the percentage? Wow. You have a better chance of getting injured in a car accident than from COVID for these kids. And they know that, but they shut them down. They took them out of school. They masked them up. The grades, forget about it. We talked about it in the past. But their grades in education plummeted. Depression, suicide, drug addiction, medication. Now they're all on, not all, a lot of them on SSRI drugs, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, which have tremendous side effects, by the way, suicidal tendencies and thoughts and violent behavior. I mean, you can look at this shit show of domino effects, and my position, Nico LaHood, pause before for your kids, for yourself, whatever. Advocate what you want to adults, but for children, when I see a kid walking, and if I see a kid, and if someone, I'm not trying to be offensive, but I really don't care right now. When I see a kid walk into a restaurant or something with a damn mask on, like, what are you teaching this child? I mean, just to go along, listen to the authorities above. I'm not saying questioning is good, but what would you do that to your child? Are you looking at the psychological effects of this kid being covered?
Think about that.
I
know.
And you're instilling fear, to be riddled with fear. Having fear is healthy. Living fearful is not healthy. To live, what do we have it? It's called anxiety. So we deal with it. I feel anxious. I'm having anxiety, and they put you on a medication. It's in your mind too. I'm not saying that there's not clinical anxiety. I'm not saying that, or that people don't need some type of help. But a lot of this is the way you think. Proverbs 23:7 says, as a man thinks in his heart, so it is. So he is. What does that mean? You'll never live beyond what you believe. If you believe to be fearful and to listen and to fall in line, whatever big, small G government God says, versus having a personal relationship, having your own mindset, critically thinking, asking questions, pushing back, questioning authority, and then molding and conforming to truth, but truly seeking truth and being a truth scavenger, as we say. That's a completely different way to live life. And that's why people like Alex Berenson should be commended. That guy went through a shitstorm. He was canceled, kicked off Twitter. He brought lawsuits. He said, no, not today. He stood the ground. He stood in the gap, stood in
for
the
him.
trenches. And he's been vindicated, by the way. Vindication for people like him and Joe Rogan and even people like Bill Maher that are pushing back, that have a voice, that are free thinkers. Whether you disagree with them on different ideological positions or not is separate. I love that exchange. But if we can agree on freedom, lack of censorship, free speech, free thought, expression of that, no censorship, man, I'm always going to be on that person's side.
But Nico, you've brought this up 100 times, and it is the money part and how many billionaires were made during this.
9 billion. You can look at CNN. They
Right.
reported on this at some point.
I think-
9 billionaires within a 10-month period. Now you've worked in pharma. 9 billionaires off one product in 10 months. 9, not millionaires, billionaires with a B. Now, are you going to tell me that's not in the equation of motives?
As Nina said, she said, as my husband said, there's no money in telling people to eat healthy and, and live and eat healthy.
Exercise.
It has
sweat.
It has to do with money, and nobody wants to talk about it. And it, I mean, obviously, Fauci has a lot to do with it.
Yeah, look,
he's richer from it.
Yeah.
You gotta look at all the data. You can't just look at the data that substantiates the things you already believe, right? Be careful with preconceived notions. Look at the work. If you guys are listening, researchers that I have a lot of respect for. Just to give you some names, I do like the work of Robert Malone. I think he's been unbelievably assailed unfairly by Twitter sphere, but I think he's doing great work. So Dr. Robert Malone, who was one of the key inventors of mRNA technology, he's been one of its great critics. So think about that for a moment.
Yeah.
Dr. Tracy Beth Hoag, it's Hoeg, from the Florida Health Department. You guys have already heard the name Marty McCary from Johns Hopkins University. Katie Scharf, Scharff. Great research work they've done. What they have found is that the myocardial ratios in young folks is something to the tune of 1 in 1900. Now, if that's not insane, nothing is. It's not 1 in a million. It's not 1 in 100,000. 1 in, I think, specifically 1862.
But over what period of time, George? That matters too. I mean, we're not looking at 5-year period of time.
No, that's right.
I mean,
yeah,
so
it's
that number could change.
It's proximal to the timing of injection. But vaccine-induced myocarditis is a thing. It's a real thing. It's a real problem. And we don't understand it causatively like we should. And there should be a shitload of money being invested in investigating those things. And there isn't. The CDC is, okay. It's a thing, but it's not a big deal. That's wrong. They're not looking at the data seriously, and we're not paying close attention to it. We got to be investing.
But at this point, George, who practically is going to do that? So you have 9 new billionaires. You have a crap ton of money being made. Who's going to say, you know what? We made too much money. Let's spend a shit ton of money to discredit this thing, and so we can pull it off the market. Who's going to do that? The only way that happens, like with Vioxx, because Merck, right, made by Vioxx, and we knew that the bean counters knew, based off the lawsuit and how it happened after, they knew it was going to kill a certain amount of people. They knew it. And they said, but you know what? The bottom line net on our net operating income, we're gonna make more. We'll pay out whatever amount in damages or whatever else, and we'll keep the remainder. They knew that is criminal. You want to talk about criminal, but they knew it. But Vioxx made it through safety studies, right? Vioxx wasn't some just emergency use authorization. Vioxx actually went through phase 4 studies, right?
Yeah, sure.
I mean, look at that.
Absolutely. The issues there were in quality control department at Merck. We'll talk about that some other time.
Yeah, I got it, brother. But I mean, it's something.
But Nico, I'm just talking about safety signals and how we've done this in the past. The 1976 swine flu vaccine was pulled back because of a 1 in 100,000 risk of Guillain-Barré syndrome. Think about that.
What is it? 1 in what?
1 in 100,000 risk, and it was pulled back in 1976.
And which drug was that?
This was the 1976 swine flu vaccine. Was pulled back.
1 in 100,000, Salo.
Yeah.
This is 1 in 1,800 and change.
1,862, and they were looking at the Kaiser Permanente database. These researchers that I just mentioned, by the way. Okay, what's being done about that? The CDC and the Health and Human Services complex is pretty much yawning at this stuff. Look, unfortunately, we're at a point here where the world's greatest clinical research and safety bodies, the CDC, the FDA, the world's once greatest, are dubious and no longer trustworthy. That is a significant loss to us just over the last 3 years. I want people to appreciate how much we've lost as a nation, and then how parents and concerned citizens have to do their own research. You've got to be responsible for your own health.
But I think a lot of people were relying on the credibility that organization once had. I mean, I'm not critical. I mean, just they're like, well, shit, they've been this credible for all these years. We could rely on them, and now all of a sudden, so they just assumed, and so a lot of people with great intentions. Of course, we were all scared initially. I mean, it was like, wait, what the hell is going on here? But that they misused that trust, and that's what's so disappointing and angering. It really does it, because I see the effects on these families when these stories are allowed to be told aloud. Look at that word.
And for what? I mean, if you're age 30 or younger, what did we mention in the last hour? The pre-vaccine COVID infection fatality rate, the IFR, and CDC publishes this stuff. You can look it up. For people under 30, was 0.003%. The infectious fatality rate pre-vaccine of getting COVID if you're under 30 is 0.003. The vaccine myocarditis risk after dose 2 is 0.03%, 10 times higher than the fatality rate.
No one's
that
talking
is
about
horrible.
This. That's huge. Say that again, George, please.
So
That's
guess
really
what?
a big
What the
deal.
hell are you getting the vaccine for? You're better off not doing anything. That's the point. I'll repeat that. The pre-vaccine, and we mentioned this in here many times. Go back and to 2020, you'll see plenty of reports on this. The pre-vaccine COVID IFR, infection fatality rate, for people under 30 was 0.003%. Okay? The vaccine myocarditis risk after dose 2 is 10 times higher than the fatality rate. It's 0.03%. Okay? So, what the hell are we doing? All I'm saying is study it. This is the stuff we ought to be studying. This is where we ought to be investing our energy. So I think Barrison's right. I think we now have an opportunity with long-term phase 3 trials. If Pfizer and Moderna go down the influenza route with mRNA technology, this is the time to restart those long-term. There's no excuse. Those long-term safety studies. Will the FDA make them do that? I'm skeptical.
So
they should.
There's no info at this time about the vaxxed versus the unvaxxed that are dying of COVID or any other other disease.
And listen, this is coming in. Karen, maybe I think we ought to consider doing a show maybe 3 to 6 months from now, because we will have a lot of really robust reporting data. But yeah, we hear stories, some better documented than others, that, yeah, indeed, that's true. Hospitals are filling up with all kinds of issues, but these are people who are largely vaccinated. That is unquestionable. People who are contracting all kinds of bizarre viruses and are not able to resolve them. Their immune systems appear to be shot. This is predominantly in vaccinated individuals, meaning COVID vaccinated individuals, not unvaccinated persons. So doesn't that deserve additional study and time? Yes, of course. Will there be serious attention given to that? I'm skeptical.
So we're back on COVID again after all those years.
I know.
We mention this because there is a serious ethical problem here. Obviously, this is criminal. But then for this administration to double down on this bullshit, this is nuts. To double down on hurry up and go get vaccinated. This is dangerous. And in the mask mandate insanity.
I know, George, but don't you think people that got vaccinated that are having problems now, they're embarrassed. They don't want to talk about it. They don't want to make the correlation between something that's happening to them and that vaccine.
But let's go back and do trade-offs and look at relative risks. You got to do that. Does it make sense to be injecting persons with outdated variant vaccine technology? Does that make sense? Right. to be, because it's largely the same formulation. The tweaks are really kind of minimal. Does that make sense? We know that the virus has mutated multiple times. Does it make sense to do that? It makes even less sense with an influenza-like virus that mutates rapidly. So does it make sense to do that? I think not. And now we just have to look at this myocarditis risk in young persons as being is growing. This is growing very quickly, especially in young males. And so that risk in young males from even one dose is going to, it's going to dwarf that of hospitalizations from reinfection, because that's what people are afraid of. Yeah. Well, I don't want to be hospitalized if I'm reinfected. Yeah. But recognize that the myocarditis risk will eclipse the risk of hospitalization. So you got to really
see what you just said earlier, though, George. I meant that 0.03 myocarditis risk after 2 doses versus 0.003 of death from COVID, and that 0.003. George, I'm not intentionally is leaving out the comorbidity conditions, overweight, right. That's a factor also. Don't get me wrong, age, a lot of different things. I mean, just that alone, why wouldn't that be on front page news for people to consider? When you talk about informed consent, that means you have to be informed, actually be given data to consider, to logically go through, think about. If you're a prayerful person, pray about, then make the decision for you and your family, or I hope just the adults in your family. But look at all the evidence and don't make a fear-driven, make a data-based decision. And that point right there, George, I don't think I've ever heard it. I think you've mentioned that in the past. But
we're learning more and more about
Okay, maybe there's something new then. I don't recall that because that really hit me.
Vaccine-induced myocarditis is a thing. It's real. And so I try to, we're getting so much really robust data. Robert Malone is doing some great work on this. He's really staying on it. And I like him because he's a disciple of clinical medicine. I love it. He puts out legitimate peer-reviewed studies nobody ever talks about. In fact, he mentioned a data analyst I'd never heard of before by the name of Josh Stevenson. This guy has co-authored multiple peer-reviewed studies on vaccine. Josh Stevenson.
Doctor, is a PhD?
The data analyst. I mean, he might be like me. He might have an undergraduate degree in chemistry and actually did chemistry. And done some. I don't think he's a chemist. I'm saying he's actually done data analysis, pharmaceutical, and contributes his works. He's credited in multiple peer-reviewed studies as being part of the research team, and he's done a lot of work on vaccine myocarditis. And I think here's what was written about him, basing on his data. Using COVID hospitalization statistics instead of deaths is a more accurate comparison, since COVID deaths are virtually non-existent in healthy young populations. Makes sense. But still, the differences are massive. For example, the risk of myocarditis from dose 1 in males 18 to 24 is 15 times higher than hospitalization from COVID reinfection. For dose 2, the risk differential, that's dose 1. For dose 2, the risk differential is a stunning 61 times greater than simply getting COVID, Karen, and resolving it naturally.
What do you do with this?
It makes me sad because even in my daughters have a couple of friends that are male, they're teenagers, and they have to go to the doctor now because they had some heart issues. No one puts it together that if they are not reading this,
the audience needs to know they're like
19,
right? Yeah.
Yes, and their friends. I mean, at least 2 boys that they know from high school have heart issues now.
And and the propaganda, Nico, sorry, is okay, that we hear the CDC talks. But it's mild.
Yeah.
I mean, really?
Tell that to the family.
I mean, what did they do? Did they have to give them medication, surgery?
A quarter of myocarditis patients end up in ICU
for the rest of their lives. They deal with
a quarter of so-called mild. It's unbelievably irresponsible. We have completely politicized these organizations, and Robert Kennedy calls them captured agencies because such a significant part of their budgets, we're talking to the tune of billions of dollars, come from the pharma complex. And this is a guy who believes.
He's a champion. He's out there been advocating for truth. He started in water and mercury levels in water, and then a mother came up to him and talked about vaccines. He was like, he doesn't have any kids that are vaccine injured. He followed the vaccine schedule that was applicable to his kids when they were younger, which is very different than the one today. But he just has a strong moral compass and truth meter. And he got drug into this advocacy on vaccine and vaccine injuries. And initially it was mercury levels. I've had the pleasure of knowing and working with Bobby Kennedy. He's an old school, blue dog Democrat type deal. He's had a lot of Democrats turn on him, family members turn on him because he's champion. He's like, I'll work with anybody to get to the truth. Trump was considered using him as a kind of on a board of vaccine overview before. I don't know what the hell happened to his ass, and he just got bought in with this rapid, whatever Operation Warp Speed BS, which is a total blunder of his presidency, total blunder that he will not repent from, which is a horrible characteristic. We'll stop. But Bobby was going to be part of that. Then he just went dark on Bobby. I remember talking to him about that. And then Bobby has Children's Health Defense Fund. What is it? The Children's
Health Defense Fund. You guys should check that out.
Check it out on their website. They have tremendous
they have a great
scholars,
research team. Their
a lot of
pieces
research team. Golly, it's very Children's Health Defense.
But Nico, it's happening. We're seeing more and more medical professionals now speaking out, and these are people who the mainstream media for a while was considering apolitical, or maybe even to the left of the political spectrum. Guys like Marty McCary are that I was on the fence about from Johns Hopkins University are starting to be pretty outspoken. Here's a tweet from him. Quote, last year, the New England Journal of Medicine described a 22-year-old that died from vaccine-induced myocarditis, and I've heard of many more cases. By the way, I have never heard of a young, healthy person with natural immunity dying from COVID. Just pause that right there. He's right.
That's huge.
I have never heard of a young, healthy person with natural immunity dying from COVID. Our government doctors have not been honest about the risks, benefit in young, healthy people. He's right. But this is Marty McCary.
I'm not
this
trying to go
this
late in the extra show. I'm not trying to go down this path. We can talk about it next time. But this is a pattern of talk about true misinformation. What happened to the 50 Intel experts that said that the laptop? And I'm just being objectively.
No, but it's the same thing.
But no one questions that now.
It's an assault on the obvious.
This is not Russian disinformation. So the left-leaning media sources that want to shut up people on the right or the people that are quote-unquote conservative, you guys are just full of shit. This is Russian. You're a Russian asset. All that. Well, now everyone agrees. Yeah. So, but where are those 50 experts? Where are the experts in the medical field? Where are the Fauci accountability? Where are these Intel experts? I hope they're not still Intel experts. So either they're grossly incompetent or deceptive. Horrible issue, either one. Incompetence or deceptive. They shouldn't be in the position they're in, whether it's in the medical field or Intel or whatever, or in media or journalism. We've got to get back to this pursuit of objective truth. Let the truth fall where it falls. If it sides against you, so be it. But at least you'll have the honor of knowing that you stood for truth, and you gain credibility.
But also look at who's making those claims, and then look at their credibility and things they've done in the past, and things they've said in the past, and whether they panned out. Does the individual have credibility? 50 intelligence officials doesn't mean a damn thing to me. Who are they? Do you know that on that list is James Clapper? Do you think James Clapper is an honest party here? Are you kidding me? Check him out.
Yeah.
This guy is not trustworthy.
But this is why we are pursuers of truth, truth scavengers. Of course, I'm very open that I have a biblical lens. I believe we can defend a biblical ideology and mindset when you look and analyze things. Truth, objective truth being one of them. God would never advocate having to stand on a lie, and we would never have. We follow the truth wherever it leads us. John 8:31 says, "If you're truly my disciple, you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free." We know that. So this is the characteristic of the God of the Bible is truth. He doesn't need to lie to us. He doesn't need to deceive us. He doesn't need to trick us. He's going to speak the truth. We believe that he is the standard bearer of truth. And so I use that mindset. So I say that, but I believe I can defend that, and I've had the opportunity to over the last 15 years of being in the public eye or whatever, of defending that ideology. But we got to get back to that, Karen, and that's why
it's not about pointing out to saying you're wrong.
I don't care about being right.
Exactly.
I want to be credible. I win at all costs. I used to think that way when I was younger. I want to win at all costs. That's very arrogant. That's a prideful. Scripture calls it haughtiness. Proverbs 6:16. God hates that haughtiness. If you got to be right at all costs, and then if you have to be right because you're trying to accomplish an agenda, that's a whole different type of wrong. If you're just arrogant, that's one thing. If you're arrogant and with an objective to deceive because you have a self-serving interest, that's a completely different type of wrong or sin pattern, in my opinion. And that's why I keep bringing up people like Bill Maher, because I disagree with him on a vast majority of stuff. But one thing that we agree on is he's not afraid to call out his side, quote unquote. He'll call them out and rail against them. He's a free speech guy. Yep. He believes in free thought and free expression. And aside from his jokes and whatever, he'll get on his little podcast and smoke dope. He brings on Kid Rock. They're tremendous friends. Kid Rock is conservative and a Trump supporter. And they had I was drawn to it. A buddy of mine sent it to me, and I thought it was fascinating. He's smoking his dope. Rock is drinking his beer, and they're having a wonderful conversation. And that's how it should be, but they're friends in the end.
Yep.
Today's standard sucks. You have to hate each other to disagree. That is a shitty standard. We've got to get away from that. And people on either side of this have got to start nurturing conversation, free think, free expression. I will continue to defend people that disagree with me. They need to have the right to disagree with me. They need to have the right to try to convince me to change my mind, and so should I. That's what we really stand for here. At least I do, with the biblical lens, of course, and I'm open about that.
I'm harking back, and the analogy is appropriate with the Hunter Biden laptop and the dynamic that's going on there. I come back to Voltaire, and I like to quote him. He's, let me just quote him for a moment. A satirist and hardly a Christian, but made a lot of sense. Quote, those who can make you believe absurdities can make you commit atrocities, right? And then he says, if people can be made to believe a lie, they will live as if the lie were the truth. And
that's Voltaire?
That's Voltaire. And
damn, that's deep. Saulo, that's deep.
If people
That's
can be
deep,
made,
man.
if people can be made to believe a lie, they will live as if the lie were the truth. And again, I want to come back to what kind of started this conversation. It's this notion that you can actually isolate yourself or inoculate yourself.
Get a chance. That's
Sure.
too deep.
That you can actually, the government has led people to believe during the COVID hysteria era that you can actually literally inoculate yourself against anything and everything. And the only way you can do that is by trusting the government. Now, notion one is nonsense, and notion two is just absurd. So, but this is where we are. People really do believe, this is the fracturing of our mind. And we go back to the Pilgrims. It's all interrelated because we learned from them. It was the first great foundational American experiment in self-government, Nico.
Yes.
That Mayflower Compact.
With
as I
a
mentioned.
transcendent view, meaning
Yes.
that if I make up the rules, I'll screw it up because I'm accountable at heart. So I got to look to God for answers. And what you just said about Voltaire, George, I just can't help but go back. We've talked about Yuri Bezmenov here many times before, and he talks about the 4 stages of ideological subversion without firing one bullet. It's demoralization. That's what Voltaire is talking about. You demoralize someone. You make them believe a lie as if it's true, and they're capable of atrocities. Destabilization, crisis, and normalization. The whole idea of a new normal. There's a crisis that's been created. Small g God government comes in and says, we'll fix it because we'll make everything right. And now here's the new normal. He talked about this in 1984. People go to YouTube.
Yes.
Look it up. There's a whole hour conversation. In 1984.
It is amazing.
Have you seen it?
Yes.
It's 9 minutes.
Oh my gosh.
This
It
is the
is
portion
amazing.
that talks about those 4 stages of ideological subversion. It's fascinating. It's scary. That was in 84. We're in 2022. We're way down the road. And it just reminded me when you brought up Voltaire, what he was talking about, because he mentioned stuff like that.
And there's an objective at the end of all this, and that's to make people very, very tired. At some point, you just kind of give up. You're tired. You don't know what to believe.
Yep.
You believe a lie, and believing lies and living lies will literally drain you of life. And Dr. Erwin Lutzer makes an interesting comparison, Nico. He says, man, centuries ago, he's hearkening back to the Old Testament. He said, centuries ago, false prophets were spouting propaganda so repeatedly that even God was made weary. And he said, and he quotes, quote,
God was made weary.
Yeah, that's right. And that's the language that's used there.
Well,
now, obviously, that's an anthropomorphic term. He's using human terms to relate to us. God isn't literally weary. But that's a great literary device that's used in the Old Testament, But he expounds on that. He said, and he said, quote, you have wearied the Lord with your words, but you say, how have we wearied him? By saying everyone who does evil is good in the sight of the Lord, and he delights in them. Or by asking, where is the God of justice? Malachi 2:17. So in other words, God was weary of listening to people who say that those who do evil are good in the sight of the Lord, and that God overlooks injustice. He became weary of people. Why? Because they're deliberately doing this, and they set up a believability apparatus. They set up an apparatus to help convey that nonsense and to make a lie palatable to the masses. And God was wearied by people like that. Part of the reason is because people who are doing that are almost impossible to correct.
Yes.
They're not just sinning, they're doing it gleefully. They're doing it
They're not
deliberately.
skeptical, they're cynical. Right?
And they're
There's a difference.
they become beyond the appeal of the Holy Spirit. In other words, that can be very wearying. In other words, there's no correction. What's the fix here? What's the fix when everything we've talked about, we've done this before here, whether it be the border, whether it be, yes, health and human services and the absurdity with COVID hysteria and mask mandates, right? Economics, continuing to pump trillions of dollars into the economy and wondering why we have an inflation problem. Looking overseas, national security. Yeah, we can talk about Afghanistan, but we didn't know we were just scraping the tip of the iceberg with that, and all of the scandals.
Don't forget about ballot still being counted.
What do you do, Karen, when it's deliberate? We've said it here before.
Yeah.
We act like, I hear punditry on this. Everybody's so shocked. This isn't shocking at all. This is rather deliberate. The United States as a nation has been compromised by individuals who are communistic at the core. They're interested singularly in power. And I want people to understand, we have the 2024 elections coming up. We have 2 years. 2 years for the Republican leadership to wise the hell up and to truly study the mistakes they've been making and to get the balls, the gumption, the moral conviction to change direction. We're loaded with money, Nico. We got tons of money. We're just using it stupidly or not using it at all. We have to, we got to step up, correct these wrongs, and force change, because what's happening is deliberate. These people will stop at nothing. We've been talking about health.
That's it. So here's the question. It was from the Untouchables. I always bring this up. The Untouchables, Sean Connery gets shot, right? Kevin Costner's with him. That's how tells you the last movie I've seen. That's how bad it's been for me. So they got shot by Al Capone's crew. De Niro's playing that. And then he asked Kevin Costner, he asked him a question, what are you prepared to do? And he says it more emphatically. And what are you prepared to do to win this war? What do you prepare? Now, I'm not saying to do anything illegal or violent, anything like that, but perseverance-wise. So you say, what's the answer? Are we prepared to educate ourselves and educate others? Are we prepared to build up our courage and express courage? Are we prepared to persevere? Those are the three things. You want to talk about how do we win? Education, because ignorance is not bliss. It's dangerous. Hosea 4:6. My people perish for lack of knowledge. It's not bliss. Courage. 2 Timothy 1:7. God didn't give you a spirit of timidity, but courage, sound mind, and strength. And then perseverance. James 1:2. Count it pure joy when you go through trials of many kind, because you know that the testing of your faith produces what? Perseverance. Let perseverance finish its work, so you will be mature and lack nothing. Romans 5:3-5 express the same sentiment. But lastly, as we wrap up, when we talk about growing weary, Galatians 6:9, do not grow weary in doing good, for you will reap a harvest if you do not give up, which infers the perseverance portion. Again, that's why, I'm not a Christian because it's easy. It's not a Christian because I like it all the time, because it means I got to be humble and this and other. I'm a Christian because I believe the evidence shows that it's true, and that you can apply these ideas and honor and be thankful to a transcendent God that controls everything, that's outside of time, space, and matter, that influences, wants to be part of our lives, and asks us to mature in a process, which means, yes, that we're going to go through some shit. He's going to allow us, like a parent, to mature through poor decisions, through stuff in life, so we can reach that goal of maturation and perseverance, so we can ultimately be mature and lack nothing. That's what I believe. So it's not growing.
Could pass for a pastor here, man. Well, I was going to say pastor.
Yeah, cussing pastor. There you go.
Let me quote another pastor, if I would. Not Pastor LaHood.
Karen, you finish off.
But Pastor H. Yeah, I'll punt on this. Pastor H.B. Charles said in a sermon, "Remember that truth is not safe in a pagan world." And we're at a point here where truth is being sold on the altar of political agendas. And so we must insist on what is true, on what is objectively decipherable and discernible. We have to insist on that. Yep. I'm worried that we'll get each into our camps, right? Everybody will take their place in their camps, and we're just gonna lob bullshit back and forth, and we're just gonna assume the worst about our ideological enemies and the best about our friends. That's all we do all day long. We can't do that.
Nope.
Go wherever you find the truth. Remember, truth is lodged in statements about reality. Who is out there talking right now? Like LaHood just said something. He made a statement. How truthful is it? Well, I don't know. I mean, truth is lodged in his statements. Does his statement correspond to reality? Those are questions we should be asking every day of stuff we hear on TV. 24-hour news cycle. We should be asking that. Is what he or she just said, does that correspond with reality?
Didn't the Bereans do that too? Or what do they call them in Acts 17? They even questioned and checked Paul.
Yeah.
They double checked Paul's stuff. I mean, the double check self-education is powerful. Karen,
Yeah, that's
go
right.
ahead.
That's right. Please.
No.
Oh no, I
You're looking
had
at us like
nothing
we're
to
crazy.
add.
This is why death and life are in the power of the tongue. That's where I was going to
Yes,
go.
Proverbs.
This is Proverbs 18:21. This is why death and life are in the power of the tongue, because what we say is communicating an idea. And Nico always says ideas have consequences. We can build up or we can literally destroy a civilization on those ideas. And if they're lodged with all kinds of bullshit falsehoods, then we'll hurt one another. We're running out of time, right?
That's the truth. Oh no, I was going to say, Nico, if you one of the last movies you watched was The Untouchables, and if that plan, I know, if that plan doesn't work with like perseverance, passion, I don't know what the
Education, perseverance.
Then we're going to have
courage.
to get rid of The Untouchables and go to 300, the other movie you told me to
300,
watch.
I love 300. That's a
Then
great
we're going to
movie.
have to do that plan.
Well, let me.
I like the second one too.
Yes.
This second what?
Isn't there a sequel to 300?
There is. I haven't watched it. I have it
it's
on
out?
my list.
Yes.
Oh shit! That tells you that what I didn't
Yes.
even know.
Well, when you said The Untouchables, there's been sequels to
The
that.
Untouchables or 300?
I thought that both.
Oh shit! I haven't seen either one of them. Now I got something to do this weekend or next weekend. But here's it. Winston Churchill said something: the most valuable thing in the world is the truth. The objective truth is the most valuable thing in the world is truth, and it's protected, and it's attacked by a bed of lies. You have to think about that. So truth matters, and it's got to matter to us. Objective truth, and we got to get back to that point, guys. Thanks for being patient with us. Thanks for joining us. Share this with somebody you think they'll benefit from these conversations of critical thinking, and hopefully we'll see you next week. Oh, wrong video. See you next week.
Wrong camera.